Hello my fellow filmmakers, camera operators and DSLR fans, this is another review live from Paris. Today I'm going to talk about the brand new Panasonic GH4. So the question everybody asks me since I got my hands on it is it what we were hoping for? Well, first you need to consider how much I paid for it. The price tag of my brand new GH4 fits between my pocket and my production BlackMagic camera. It shares the same 4K capacity with the 4K BlackMagic, but is unable to record ProRes or RAW files. It does have a Micro Four Thirds mount like the Pocket, and its sensor size is way smaller than the BlackMagic production camera. Nevertheless, the GH4 claims features that makes you want to have one. But first, let's search for the right settings. I tried to bring the image as flat as possible. I also use a focal reducer in order to use my EF lenses. Filmmakers will focus on two modes, the Cine-like V, which is more contrast, and the Cine-like D, which is the flattest possible you can get. If you do, like me, a lot of color grading in post-production, I suggest you keep Cine-like D. With the GH4 you get a lot of sub-menus, and one of them drove me crazy. It was the eye dynamic option, who brings a lot of digital noises. With the eye dynamic in standard, you get a YouTube kind of feeling. Keep this baby off if you want to get a good image. Settings can be tricky, so go and buy the EOS HD Shooter's Guide from Andrew Reid. I don't get any penny advertising on this, but Andrew did an amazing job. So here I am, going down my building, chatting with my janitor in available light condition. Working too long with ProRes codec, I forgot about one thing, compression. And it was even worse when I graded it. Skin tone felt unnatural. And adding a simple LUT added a lot of macro blocking. I don't know if you see it on Vimeo or YouTube here, but I can play Tetris with my texture. A robust, professional codec is quite important, so let's compare it with the BlackMagic Pocket camera. Here they are, one on top of the other. For this test I used natural light, so the skin tone would feel even in any case. And this time it looked pretty okay to me. It's only when I turned on the BlackMagic Pocket Cinema camera that I realized that the image is way flatter. Then I applied a very simple color correction with contrast and saturation. The little doll's face turned salmon. On the contrary, on the BlackMagic Pocket Cinema camera, the doll shows a very natural skin tone. Checking them side by side, you can see the difference. You realize that color science has little to do with resolution. But we knew already that compression was not the best feature you can get from the GH4. So let's focus on the new cool things like slow motion. For this I'm gonna use my vintage ingenious zoom lens. Here it is at 4K in all its glory. And then I switched to slow-mo. And surprise, vigneting! The explanation for this is pretty simple. The sensor doesn't crop the same way when it uses 4K or 1080p. Okay, I'm gonna keep that lens anyway. This is my assistant, Stefan, who's guinea pigging for me and also getting a little wet for the sake of this test. We have to admit that HD slow-mo was an unreachable feature for most of us due to the price of it. None of my BlackMagic have it, and you can get it on a Canon but only at 720p. I love slow-mo, but there's a little problem with it. You will have to help the camera with a little light, otherwise color correction might be a nightmare. The slower you get, the more compressed it is. See it for yourself with a 300% magnification. So I filmed my dog Yo-Yo in better light conditions. But the problem is a very slow dog, so you can tell the difference. I had to push it to 96 frames per second. Any better? Compression is an issue, but fortunately there are solutions with external recorder. Then again, you have to check the prices. For example, the AJ Key Pro solution is $1,000 more expensive than the most expensive BlackMagic URSAPL camera, without cables, batteries and media. This is why I rather get the upcoming Atomos Shogun solution. It is a more reasonable price, plus you get an extra field monitor. But since it's not yet available, we decided to make a pause and go for some French pancakes. What you have to know is below 60 frames per second, compression is acceptable. Above 60 frames per second, compression gets on your way. Some of you noticed that we used the 100th shutter speed, which generates an anti-cinematic ghosting effect. We know that proper shutter speed doubles the frame rate, but because of the neon lights above the cook, the 200th was showing light bending. As a guerrilla director, I always find ways to solve my problems. For example, Need Video is a rather good solution for noisy frames. And you can still apply some grain in post if you think the image is too clean. Now that I mastered the GH4, time to compare it with the 4K BlackMagic production camera. Okay, it's a little bit overdramatic. To be fair, we're gonna use the same lens and the same setting. First, let's check crop factor and dynamic range. On a GH4, a 16mm lens becomes a 35mm lens. It is due to the camera's smaller sensor. This is why I use the focal reducer, even if I notice that mine softened the edges at 16mm. But for a Chinese Metabone ripoff, it does the job. This trick allows you to approach the f/35 BlackMagic production camera sensor, but hopefully not its problematic dynamic range. Now let's compare the two images. There's so much difference between the two images that at first I thought I left the BlackMagic camera in video mode. And the difference is getting worse when you try to color correct it. The GH4 outperforms the BMPC both in contrast and color response. Now let's zoom in a little bit. BlackMagic's ProRes doesn't get rid of all the details, whereas the GH4 makes the image a little soft and noisy. Reminds me of a song. Soft and noisy, soft and noisy. Then again, removing the focal reducer sharpens a little bit, but you lose some fields of view. Can't have it all. Dynamic range is a very important issue, especially in broad daylight where you can't control the sun. When Panasonic claims that their GH4 camera holds 13 stops, I am inclined to believe them. But when BlackMagic says their camera can support 12 stops, well, I'm not sure about that. Though it is true that when you lift the blacks, you get a lot of information in the image without raising too much noise, which is not the case with the GH4. So I guess you can call it even on this one. I won't spoil the surprise telling you that with the coming of 4K resolution, aliasing and moire are becoming a thing of the past. BMPC makes the leaves and the branches come alive. And here comes the GH4, not as sharp but with a wider dynamic range. In any case, you have a great image to work with. And look at it without the focal reducer, not as wide but sharper. Now let's compare it with the production camera, which seems to be a clear winner for the moment, because we are waiting for an external recorder like the Atomos Shogun. Now that we know their differences, I was wondering myself, can I match the two cameras? This is the kind of real-life situation that everybody gets. Because this is not a which one should I buy case, but can I use them together? Fortunately, we have Impulse from Color Grading Central. The Impulse Loot plugin makes your life easier because they're custom for each camera. Now, can you tell which is which? Though I admit it took me more time to grade the GH4. Now let's keep to what I will call the unfair test. The BlackMagic production camera has a 35 global sensor, which means no rolling shutter, no jello. Poor little GH4 can't compete in that category. I would say it's an average DSLR rolling shutter. similar to a 7D, and of course you can fix it in post. Depth of field is the last concern you get when you buy a camera with a smaller sensor. The BlackMagic one is pretty cinematic, and cheating with a focal reducer, the GH4 is quite okay. Of course, none of the camera can compete with the full frame sensor of the 5D, but don't you think that this shallow depth of field fashion is so 2008? Here it is with a 2.8 aperture without a focal reducer, not that bad. Of course, there are plenty of little things that made me buy the GH4, which I found amazing, like its very bright articulated screen showing spirit level histograms, and I even could use my BMPCC LCD EVF. I also love its super lightweight, its everlasting battery life. I won't miss external V-mount, its Wi-Fi connection with iPad and iPhone for control and replay. In conclusion, if you ask me should I buy a GH4, I would say absolutely, because it's the step in the right direction. We never had a camera with such affordable high-end features. And will you make great movies with a GH4? If you ask me, I believe it's not the camera but the person behind it. By the way, there was an iPhone shot between these GH4 images. Can you guess which one?